Alzheimer's and dementia symptoms showing up in people as young as 20 and 30 years old. It is happening more and more, according to a new study. So, what is behind this alarming trend? Well, that is what we're going to find out today on the exam room. And welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I'm the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thank you so very much for watching and downloading in more than 150 countries around the world and making the Exam Room one of the most consumed nutrition podcasts anywhere on the planet today. Now, new research is indeed showing that the warning signs for Alzheimer's and dementia are showing up much earlier in life than we previously thought. And while most cases remain among people 70 years old or older, a surprising number of younger people now are some in the prime of their life, even fresh out of college, just at the age where you would be thinking they're ready to start a family. They are now suddenly themselves showing signs of cognitive decline. So, what is behind this surge, and what can you do to protect the health of your brain? Well, today our answers will be coming from Dr. Neal Barnard, best-selling author and president and founder of the Physicians Committee. And if you have a question for Dr. Barnard, drop it in the comments or in the chat. We're going to get to as many as we can during the live broadcast. And with that, let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Barnard to the show. Thanks for being here, my friend.
Great to be with you, Chuck.
This is an extraordinary finding, I think, Dr. Barnard, because we're talking about this at a time when the Alzheimer's Association just released data as well, showing that an estimated 7.2 million Americans now who are 65 or older have Alzheimer's dementia. And that's up 300,000 cases from last year. So we're seeing this more and more, but the majority of those are still with older people. But as we're talking about with the findings today, people in their 20s, their 30s, their early 40s, you wouldn't expect to be showing signs of cognitive decline, but nonetheless, here we are. What did we learn from this?
Now, what you said is exactly right. Alzheimer's disease has been increasing, and that's partly because of the aging of the population, but it's also because we're not in as good a health as we should be. If a person reaches age 70, 75, 80, and they happen to have diabetes, overweight, high cholesterol, they're at higher risk for Alzheimer's. And so that's what we're seeing driving this epidemic of Alzheimer's disease and related pathologies in older age. But this new study just came out in the Lancet, earth-shattering. They looked at young people. They started looking at them when they were in this between 7th and 12th grades. And then they followed them up to maybe as much as age 40, something like that. And they did cognitive testing and blood tests and lots of physical tests as well. And when you're 30 or 40, you're not going to develop the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. But what they did see was that among people who had all of the big drivers that I mentioned earlier, if you got diabetes, you have hypertension, if you're overweight, and then they also looked at other markers that are specific for Alzheimer's, like too much tau protein in your bloodstream, for example. They found that indeed, you could see the beginnings of cognitive decline. And Chuck, it's rather subtle science. It's not that a person's lost their ability to think and reason, but subtle things like researchers would sit down in a room and they'd say, here are 15 words. I'm going to say the word list, and then you tell me how many of the words you remember. They show that with a lot of people at that age, they can't really remember things, they can't retain them, and you start seeing these effects quite earlier in life. And it goes right along with the very same risk factors that we see for Alzheimer's. So Chuck, your warning bells here are absolutely right. It really does mean that we're starting to see the early signs of cognitive decline extremely early, much earlier than we had thought.
All right, so let's talk about what may be behind this. And I'm assuming that we're talking about, just so we can kind of really hammer home this point, this is different than early onset dementia. We're talking about the early hallmark signs of traditional dementia and Alzheimer's here, correct?
There are cases of Alzheimer's disease itself that are strongly genetic, and you can see them early in life when a person is maybe 40 or 50. That's really quite rare. What they're finding in this study is something more subtle, but more pervasive, much more common, but the signs are relatively subtle at that age.
All right. Now, what do they think is behind this? Is it, the same kind of risk factors that we've talked about for Alzheimer's traditional cases, or is something else happening here? What are we surmising?
Much of it's similar, much of it's not. We've known for a long period of time that whatever is harmful to the heart tends to take a toll on the brain. So in this study, they found high blood pressure, obesity. If you've got high cholesterol, for example, those are all things that threaten the heart. And we learned a long time ago that those things threaten the brain as well. They threaten cognition. They found that exactly. But there was one kind of surprise. There is a gene called the APOE epsilon 4 gene or allele. If you were born with that and you got it from both parents, your risk of Alzheimer's is 10 to 15 times higher than other people. That seems to manifest later in life. In this cohort of young people, it didn't seem to make any difference. The people who did not have that gene were at as much risk as the others. So what we think is that it's metabolic drivers where you're having high blood pressure or obesity, high cholesterol, that's probably attacking the tiny blood vessels that go to the brain, narrowing them, maybe even in some cases causing little mini strokes. But that's not the common thing. But you do start to see the brain cells being choked off, and this is because of not genetics predominantly. It's because of the kind of diets that people eat. Let's face it, Chuck. When you're 20, you're immortal, so you can eat bacon and burgers and fried chicken and all these things, thinking that it couldn't possibly hurt us at this age, but the damage is there.
And I think that that's a really important factor. I remember thinking back when I was overweight, I knew I was doing damage to my body, obviously, but I didn't, fully grasp what the long-term ramification would be. I thought that, well, eventually I might be able to lose weight and I'll be okay. But in this case, I mean, this is something more sinister that can kind of creep up on you long term. And people haven't drawn the connection between that with their diet and their health. And so certainly if you're doing the typical drive-through diet in your 20s, the last thing you're thinking about is this dinner that I'm about to consume going to give me Alzheimer's down the line? What do you think it's going to take for younger people to kind of listen to this message and realize that, yeah, immortality actually does begin in your teens and in your 20s?
This is a theme that's been going on for a long period of time now. Chuck, when I was in medical school, we were taught that to diagnose type 2 diabetes, a person had to be at least in their 40s. Now you can see it at 14. We're seeing obesity. We're seeing high cholesterol levels and high blood pressure in kids before they get their high school diploma. And we also now are seeing ever-growing rates of colorectal cancer. It's for the overall population, it's dropping, but for young people, meaning anybody 50 or below, we're seeing higher and higher and higher rates. It's not genetic. It's because of the diets that young people are eating now, which are the worst diets we've seen in a really long time. So what this study from the Lancet, which is from researchers at Columbia, it says, okay, it's not just that you're more likely to develop diabetes, not just that you're more likely to develop cancer, but you're also more likely to start having problems with your mentation that are probably going to be irreversible. So that's the danger. The good news is we have learned through a number of cohort studies that there are certain foods and certain dietary patterns that have precisely the opposite effect. They are protective of the brain. We don't know yet if a person who's gone pretty far into cognitive decline can be retrieved, but Dean Ornish's recent research has shown that when a person has started to show some decline, that with a healthy diet and lifestyle, they can be improved. So my hope is that if this warning bell sounds and we put people on healthier diets and those that have been on not so healthy diets, if they can change, then I think we can win this battle.
Yeah, because it sounds like the people that we're talking about here use the term subtle changes. I think that Dr. Ornish's study talks about mild cognitive impairment. Those people in that group. These people, would they even qualify as being mildly cognitively impaired yet? Because it's so subtle. Or, are these in fact the exact people who Dr. Ornish believes, his findings would benefit the most?
This group, as you're hinting at, Chuck, this group is more subtle still. In Ornish's study, it was people with really the earliest stages of Alzheimer's disease where they knew there was something wrong. They knew they were not doing well, and their family members could recognize it as well. With this group of young people who are 40 and below, the cognitive changes were things that showed up clearly on testing, but that they might not have been aware of. Or it's sort of like, well, I didn't get a very good night's sleep last night, so that's why I'm cognitively not myself, but it's that way every single day. And so what they could show, they had a huge group of people, up to 11,000 or more young people that they were tracking. And in some, they were fine. Those who tended to maintain healthy blood pressure, healthy body weight, healthy cholesterol levels, those who tended to have healthy lifestyles, maintained their cognitive function substantially better. It was those who were not doing well on those measures who were having trouble cognitively.
All right, we have somebody who's going for their PhD today. Brittany is wondering what specific areas of the brain are being impacted here with this early signs. Is it the hippocampus? Which parts of the brain do you think we're talking about specifically?
PhD, you said it. The hippocampus. The hippocampus is the seat of memory. Think of it as kind of the early switchboard where things run through the memories and events run through the hippocampus prior to storage. But then there are two other areas. There's the frontal lobe, and then there's the temporal lobe. And those are areas where you see the changes of Alzheimer's disease fairly early, and that there was a Dr. Alois Alzheimer back in 1906. He looked at those areas, and he said, "Here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing amyloid plaques in between the cells. I'm seeing tau proteins inside the cells, abnormal proteins," and that became pathognomonic for the disease that was then named after him. And that's in these young people. Testing showed that there was an association between tau protein that showed up on blood tests and their inability to function normally on cognitive tests. So we never imagined that you'd see this in a person in their 30s.
Yeah, no kidding. If you find this as fascinating as I do, please be sure to give a thumbs up to this video and subscribe to it here on YouTube, or give it a like on Facebook as well. We have some people wondering about cholesterol. That was one of the risk factors, Dr. Barnard, that was identified in this research. First of all, let's talk about those foods that are really high in cholesterol. When we think about cholesterol here on the exam room, obviously we gravitate toward meat. We gravitate toward dairy. But what are the ones that really have the highest amounts of cholesterol that we should really be concerned about in terms of what we're discussing today?
Yeah, well, cholesterol itself is in eggs, of course, as everybody knows. There's a huge amount of cholesterol in an egg. Also, shellfish, very high in cholesterol as well. But probably more important than the cholesterol content of the foods is the saturated fat content, because that causes the body to maintain a higher level of cholesterol. The high saturated fat diet makes it hard for your body to eliminate cholesterol. So both are important. A couple of quick principles. Animal products contain cholesterol. Plant foods typically don't contain cholesterol. So that's easy. So if you avoid the animal products, you're really going to avoid virtually all the cholesterol. With regard to the saturated fat, which is the big driver, dairy products, number one. Look at cheese, but all the dairy products, number one. Number two is meat. And then in the plant world, there are really only a couple things: coconut oil, palm oil. Those are the really big contributors to saturated fat as well. So I would avoid those 100%.
All right, let's talk about then the inverse of that, those foods that will help bring those cholesterol levels back down. Are there some plant foods that are really more effective than others at dropping the cholesterol levels?
Yeah, there sure are. David Jenkins at the University of Toronto had investigated this and really came up with some very practical steps. The first thing is getting away from animal products is step one, because if you do that, there's no animal fat, there's no cholesterol in your diet. Do that. But for extra credit, he developed a portfolio of foods that seemed to lower cholesterol a little bit extra. And it starts with foods that are high in soluble fiber, like oats. You've heard on the oat brand oatmeal commercials or Cheerios commercials, they'll say oats will lower cholesterol, and it will. Not huge, but it'll bring your cholesterol down a couple more points. That's because of the soluble fiber in there. Beans have a similar effect. He found that he could get some cholesterol lowering effect out of almonds. Nuts may have that effect, but you got to be careful because nuts are so fatty, they can sometimes stymie your weight loss. There's some evidence that soy products have a cholesterol lowering effect over and above the fact that it's a plant. And the last group is some sterol and stanol margarines. Venacol is probably the best known. Take Control is another. And they have special cholesterol lowering effect too.
All right, let's go ahead and open up the doctor's mailbag here and take a question from JP, who wants to talk a little bit more, Dr. Barnard, about cholesterol. He wants to know, can taking meds for high cholesterol actually cause dementia because our brain uses cholesterol, to fuel itself in a way? He wants to know, are these meds actually perhaps doing more damage to the brain than they are good? What do we know there?
Fascinating question. Overall, a lower cholesterol is a good thing. And the more you lower your cholesterol level, the safer your brain's going to be. However, the FDA started receiving reports back 20 years ago that people taking statins to lower their cholesterol, in relatively rare cases, they would have quite florid memory problems. And at first, this just seemed like a fluke, but they've now received hundreds of reports of this. So overall, a person who cannot get their cholesterol down, they're vegan and they're exercising and everything, and their cholesterol is just stuck high, they take a statin. That's probably a good choice for that individual because their cholesterol comes down. That's safe. But there have been cases where people have done exactly that. They've taken their statin and within a matter of weeks, their memory starts to flutter. And we see this with quite a number of medications where the medications have an assault on the brain. And the take-home message here is just, if a person has a sudden change in their cognitive status, walk into the bathroom, open up the medicine cabinet, and see what's new, because it's very often a new medicine that they're taking.
Do we know what the risk of Alzheimer's and dementia is for someone who just naturally has that high cholesterol? They've got that gene where their body just produces an excess amount.
At Kaiser, back, when this was maybe 2010, 2011, something like that, Kaiser brought in about 10,000 people, Kaiser Permanente, and they took their cholesterol levels when they were about 40 years of age. And then they just tracked them as the years went by. And so right around 70, they started to see the Alzheimer's cases started to come out. There was a lot of variability. So it's hard to predict from one given person, okay, their total cholesterol is 220 or 350 or whatever it may be. It's a little hard to gauge what exactly your Alzheimer's risk is. But what they did see was a clear-cut overall trend that the people with low total cholesterol and low LDL cholesterol in particular seem to get some protection. Those with high LDL and high total tended to be at higher risk. HDL, the so-called good cholesterol, is probably not an actor when it comes to cognitive function.
Eye to the sky, maybe an astronomer perhaps, wants to know if perhaps the findings in this study showing younger people showing cognitive decline, could that be connected to the trend of carnivore diets and keto diets, Dr. Barnard?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a ketogenic diet puts you on all the foods that are bad for you. In typical studies where we look at keto diets, when a person is on a ketogenic diet, they're trying to lose weight. And because they take out all the carbohydrate, even though I would not recommend doing that because those are some of the healthiest foods, if they're doing that, they're taking out about half their calories. So they ought to be losing weight. Except and weight loss by just about any means usually causes cholesterol levels to drop. If you're skinnier, your cholesterol level drops. But keto diets have really been the exception. About 1 in 3 keto dieters, even if they're losing weight, their cholesterol goes way up, sometimes astronomically. And that's because the foods left behind when you throw out the carbs and so forth, the foods left behind are meat or gravy and stuff like that. And so that tends to raise cholesterol. It's a real mistake. In a carnivore diet, same kind of story. It's a very meaty, kind of macho sort of diet. But even people who aren't on exactly a carnivore diet or a keto diet, people eat very meaty diets, very cheese-heavy diets. Cheese intake was, 3.8 pounds per person per year back in 1909 when the USDA started tracking. So a little bit more than a century ago, people were eating very little cheese. Today, your average American consumes close to 40 pounds of it per year. So you don't have to be on a ketogenic diet. You can just be on an American diet, and you can really do a number on your blood vessels, your heart, and your brain.
I know, obviously, there have been studies on which diets are protective. We saw that with Ornish most recently, but have there been studies conducted that actually compare the risk of dementia based on the specific diet? Say, the keto, the carnivore, South Beach, Mediterranean, et cetera, et cetera?
There have been a number of studies that have looked particularly partly at patterns and also at particular foods. And I want to give some credit to Harvard. The Nurses' Health Study got started. Shortly after that, the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study got started. They were males and females. The Nurses' Study was women, and the Health Professionals was a study of men. And as these studies went along, they reported on lots of connections between food and health. And once these participants started to reach older age, they could start to draw conclusions about foods and cognitive decline. And they came up with some findings that aren't going to really surprise you. I mean, it sounds very much like the foods for cancer prevention or cardiovascular disease prevention. The foods that seemed to be protective from the standpoint of cognitive health were green leafy vegetables, cruciferous vegetables. There was some evidence of fruit being beneficial in both of these studies. And then also around the same time, the Framingham Heart Study, which started back in 1948. And this was the granddaddy of all of them. This is the one that showed the risk factors for heart disease. Well, the Framingham study, beginning in the 40s, had their children start the study and then their grandchildren start the study so they could look at true longitudinal trends. And there have been several like this. And so what we've seen is that vegetables, just about any kind of vegetable, tends to be protective. Same with fruits, same with the legume group. And some of the same standouts that you and I have talked about before, like blueberries and other anthocyanin-rich foods, or beta-carotene-rich foods like carrots and sweet potatoes, or lycopene-rich foods like tomatoes and watermelon, they are all apparently associated with some cognitive protection.
I was having this debate with a friend recently, and we were kind of bandying about whether or not the bigger benefit when it comes to disease reduction, whether it's Alzheimer's like we're talking about today, or cancer or heart disease, whether the bigger benefit is because you're not eating the unhealthy foods or because you are eating the healthier foods. Are they equal here?
Okay, $64,000 question, Chuck. I think both are happening. First of all, to not eat spam is a good idea. To not be eating, fried chicken is a good idea. To get away from the unhealthy foods is a good idea. But let's say my choice is white rice or something that's got antioxidants in it. Like I mentioned, a carrot or a sweet potato that's got beta carotene, or the lycopene, which is the red color in a tomato, or the anthocyanins in a blueberry. If you're eating something that is free of all the bad stuff, but it also brings you the antioxidants, that's going to be better than just avoiding the bad things alone.
Gotcha. All right, let's grab a couple of more questions and then shift over to some exciting happenings over at the NIH that I want to make sure that we get to today as well. Let's take a question from Roxina, wondering whether or not, Dr. Barnard, you can comment on the cognitive impact that starts in the 40s because of aging and premenopause, which brings about tiredness and a limited amount of energy, but yet it's accepted as normal, as she says, and how a diet can impact this and potentially help a lot with the symptoms.
Okay, great question. I don't mean to suggest that anytime a person is having cognitive changes, that's the same as a permanent cognitive decline of what we've been discussing. The person raising the question talks about menopausal changes and that sort of thing. And sometimes when a person is having hormonal shifts, they just don't feel like themselves. And they're not sleeping well. And when you don't sleep well, your memory kind of sputters, and that can happen. This can also happen, say, if a person is hypothyroid. You think, what is going on? I don't feel good at all. And your doctor could help sort these things out. And before a person races off to think that I need a pharmaceutical solution, a lot of doctors nowadays will talk about, say, for the menopausal transition, let's get away from animal products. Let's bring in plant products, a plant-based diet. Bring in soybeans, because our group, as you know, showed that a low-fat vegan diet supplemented with a half a cup of soybeans knocks out the hot flashes to about close to 90%, which means you get a good night's sleep, which means you feel better. You lose some weight along with it, and people often, they get their mental balance back there. If a person is hypothyroid, the doctor will discover whether you are iodine deficient, easy to fix, or if there's something else going on.
Lori in the chat is wondering whether collagen can be protective against dementia. Do we know of any research there?
Well, people are consuming collagen for all kinds of reasons, but when you swallow it, your digestive tract tears it apart. And so it's often sold as an anti-aging kind of thing, because collagen is integral to the skin. But when you swallow it, it ends up not having any effect at all, because it's torn up by the digestive enzymes.
Fair enough. And look, we're talking about this from an American standpoint, but Alzheimer's continues to be a global burden. There's no question about it. Roxina, whose question we just had, she's joining us today from the Netherlands. And then we've got other people from around the world here. We've got someone in Las Cruces. We've got Jay in Las Cruces today. We've got people from all over. We've got a couple of people from Japan who are tuning in today. Not an American issue. And I would assume that these findings are going to hold true from a global perspective, Dr. Barnard.
Well, they do hold true, but at the same time, global research has shown the emergence of these factors, and has helped us to understand some of the cause and effect. In Japan, I have to say, Japan used to have the thinnest, longest lived population that there was. This is before McDonald's invaded Tokyo. Japan was not a country consuming cheese and dairy products and meat and so forth. There was some fish, but not huge. Some meat, relatively little. Lots of rice and soybeans and vegetables. And you had a country that did not have a lot of diabetes, a lot of hot flashes and so forth. But as Westernization has kicked in, you see many, many problems, not just physical problems, but also cognitive problems and emotional problems like depression. So in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, this was a place where people used to be pretty healthy, because their staples were simple, inexpensive beans and corn and vegetables. And as diets have changed worldwide, you start to see problems emerging in real time.
All right, let's kind of button up this study here. Were there any limitations, Tiffany is wondering, to the research that we were talking about with the early signs of dementia showing up for people in their 20s and 30s? Was there any limitation there, Dr. Barnard?
Well, I think there are always limitations with every kind of research study. I mean, you do a study, and by the way, this is a great study. It was published in The Lancet. It was done by Columbia University researchers. They brought in young people, as I mentioned. They were between 7th and 12th grades. They were totally healthy, and they were tracked very, very carefully. So that's all good. Nonetheless, you often find yourself thinking, all right, could I be missing something? If high blood pressure is leading to a cognitive issue, maybe could it be the other way around? Maybe a person had cognitive problems, and that caused them to not eat very well. And so that's what led to these issues. So researchers are always trying to think, could there be some other explanation? And to their credit, I think these researchers ruled out most of those weaknesses. So solid study, and I think that it should send warning bells off that just because you're 16, 17, 18 does not mean that your diet isn't affecting you. It's affecting you in a great many ways. And we saw this back in the Vietnam War. There'd be a young soldier killed at 20 years of age, 19, 20, 21. When you would do an autopsy, you would see artery blockages in their heart, artery blockages going to their brain, even artery blockages in the lower back that lead to chronic back pain in these people who are in the absolute prime of life. And so people who are walking around with, unfortunately, not particularly good diets and are sedentary and so forth, well, it's unfortunately setting the body up for failure.
And what do you think this means for how we should be screening for cognitive impairment moving forward? I mean, again, this used to be a quote unquote old person's disease, but we're seeing signs in younger and younger people. What do you think this means for the future here?
The question that you asked, it was actually posed by the researchers themselves, is maybe we need to start screening. And I understand where they're coming from, but let me take another view. I think rather than just looking for the people showing signs of problems, we should assume that every young person growing up is going to be vulnerable to these things. And don't just screen looking for the person who is having cognitive decline. Assume that every child needs a healthy diet and they need to be shielded from diets that are going to work against them. Politically, we've got all kinds of problems. There is a move on Capitol Hill right now to put dairy fat back in kids' diets. It's been gone. You know, the milk served in schools, I wouldn't serve milk at schools at all, but the milks that were served, at least were the non-fat milks. Well, there's a trend now to try to put it back in. We're seeing trends to try to exonerate animal fats of all kinds. And I think we need to not go there. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, those things are the basic elements that help kids survive, to thrive. And that should be front and center in every food assistance program, in every school lunch program. We should be throwing out the meat and the bad stuff for these kids and help them to have the best shot at being healthy. They need vitamin B12, just like people do at every age. That's all really important. Assume the kids are fragile. Assume that heart disease and diabetes can kick in, and feed them the very best foods in the same way as we want to give them the best education.
Sir, that soapbox that you're on right now, don't ever get off of it. You are 100% correct, my friend. That is critically important. Now, I wanted to shift gears. I mentioned some big happenings over at the NIH. And if you find this announcement as exciting as I do, be sure to give the video here a thumbs up, because yesterday afternoon, sitting at my desk here, email comes across from our colleague, Elizabeth Baker. Breaking news, Dr. Barnard. The National Institutes of Health announced this afternoon that it is making a major commitment to shifting away from animal research toward human-based research. I don't think we can overstate how massive this is, Dr. Barnard.
It's just the greatest thing. And I have to say, we saw this going back in 2016, where Congress was really pushing the EPA to embrace non-animal methods. And to their credit, the folks at EPA said, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to set some standards. And in 2019, with our Christy Sullivan and Esther Hagerbrooks sitting right there with Andrew Wheeler, the EPA administrator, as he made his announcement that they were going to move toward non-animal methods, and they've re-upped that commitment now. And then when was it? 2 weeks ago, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, said we have to move away from animal tests to non-animal methods. Why? They're faster, they're cheaper, they're better, they're more reliable, and they're more ethical. And we have been working with and kind of arm twisting with NIH for a long time. And I do want to thank NIH. They funded our diabetes research back 20 some years ago. But Jay Bhattacharya, who is the NIH director, made exactly the statement that you said. He said, we need to be moving away from animal research. We need to be embracing the new human-based methods. And that will make research more ethical. It'll make it cheaper. It'll make it focused on where it needs to be. And it's a terrific thing. Now, what it means is to really think broadly about how research is done, instead of trying to model Alzheimer's disease in a rat or mouse, instead of trying to model diabetes in rodents and so forth. Let's find out how we can best study these conditions in human beings ethically. And if you can't do this safely in a human being, we are looking at organoids and organs on a chip and technologies that we just didn't have 20 years ago, but we have them now. So I'm very grateful to Director Bhattacharya for making that statement, for making a commitment to invest in the very best of research. And I also want to thank Elizabeth and the team for having been working with NIH all these years to make this possible.
Absolutely. I mean, this is huge. Obviously, an enormous victory for ethics. I mean, and animal welfare. I mean, that's an absolute given. To the broader point, though, for literally every person in this country, it means, as you said, cheaper research means that the cost of medication coming to market theoretically will be down. It will speed up the process of testing and bring new, more effective medication to market faster and, again, less expensively. And that in turn means better health. So yes, I mean, let's all focus on being more active and eating a healthier diet. But for those who need this medication and don't have years to wait to get it, this is going to speed up that process and ensure that they are more effective than they have ever been before. This is truly a victory for everyone, Dr. Barnard.
Well, yes, what you said is exactly right. And there's another thing too, is that animal studies are notoriously poor predictors of medication candidates that are going to really work. And so if you have better methods that help you sort out the candidate that works, then not only is the testing faster, but the candidates that the drug candidates you're going to choose are going to be more likely the ones that are going to win.
Yep. And I know that you're going to be talking more about this on Mission Critical this Friday afternoon. So go to pcrm.org/events to save your seat for that virtual, completely free pcrm.org/events. Sign up for Mission Critical this and every Friday. But this particular Friday, that's going to be a massive episode, man. A massive episode. I can't wait. I'm going to save my seat as soon as we finish up today. But we can't finish today also without giving a tip of the cap to our friends over at the Gregory J. Reiter Memorial Fund, Dr. Barnard, who are equally celebrating this NIH victory because the Gregory J. Reiter Memorial Fund supports organizations just like the Physicians Committee that carry on the love that Greg had for animals by promoting plant-based health and working to end animal abuse while also emphasizing programs that promote systemic change to benefit people. And you can visit them online right now at gregoryreiterfund.org. That's Gregory Reiter, R-E-I-T-E-R, fund.org. Sign up for their newsletter, see everything that Allison and the gang are up to. I don't know if you've had the opportunity yet to speak with Allison about this particular victory, but I would imagine she is elated, my friend.
Well, this has been something that's been a long time coming, and it's going to continue to require shepherding to make sure that we go in the right direction. But I want to say a huge thank you to Allison Mahoney and her team for supporting the exam room and supporting our work, and really allowing Greg's vision and Greg's heart to live on in making this world not only smarter scientifically, but also more ethical as well.
Oh, my friend, and I want to give a huge thanks to you, as always, for being here and helping to raise our health IQs today.
You bet, Chuck. Thank you.
All right. And thank you to all of the exam roomies for such wonderful questions and to the crew behind the scenes for making the magic happen. Thank you. And if you feel like you've raised your health IQ, again, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe here on YouTube, give us a like on Facebook as well. And for everybody here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. We will talk to you again very soon. But until then, keep it plant-based.